Welcome to This is Oregon, a podcast where we typically take you inside research happening at the University of Oregon and show you how it applies to your daily life. We're shaking things up slightly for this episode, though. My name is Ben Shoresman, and I'll be your host. I'm joined in the studio by a special guest, none other than the president of the University of Oregon, Karl Scholz. Karl, welcome. I know you don't like the focus to be on yourself, but since this is your inaugural podcast, would you mind indulging us and share a bit about your background and your journey to Oregon?
Well, Ben, it's great to be here, and for anyone listening, thanks for picking up the show. I'm in my third year as the president of the University of Oregon. Friends of mine think a distinctive aspect of me is that I was born and raised in Nebraska. I spent 35 years in Madison, Wisconsin. I tell people there that I was from Nebraska, and they would feel pity. Moving out to Oregon, turns out people find it kind of exotic. They haven't met many Nebraskans. And so there are many, many things I love about the University of Oregon, but that's one of them.
Appreciate that. This fall, the University of Oregon turns 150. What does the anniversary mean to you, and what do you want it to signal to the state?
Well, clearly, any 150th anniversary, any anniversary divisible by 50 is a time to look back and savor. And so we can look back and think about our relationship to Walt Disney, or the invention, if you will, or the research use of the zebrafish, the creation of Nike, the Oregon Bach Festival, the national champion Tall Furs basketball team. But much, much more important than looking back is it's an opportunity to look forward. What do we want to be in the future as a university? And we have a roadmap. That's Oregon Rising, and I suspect we'll talk a little bit about this, but this is to create, remove impediments to timely graduation. It's to be best in class and helping our students navigate the college experience to whatever happens next. It's to create a flourishing community, and it's to accelerate or amplify the world-class research strengths that exist at the University of Oregon. But in short, the 150th isn't just a celebration of where we've been. It's a statement about where we're going and how will we meet this moment.
Speaking to that, at a recent economic summit at Stanford, you made a point that the credibility problem institutions are facing isn't unique to universities. Why is that distinction important, and how can we work to repair some of that loss?
Well, Ben, let me give a little bit of background to that sentiment. When I started, I've been in higher education for many decades. And when I started, colleges and universities were sort of universally, if not loved, viewed as very positive contributors to society. And over time, for a variety of different reasons, that appreciation, that enthusiasm about higher education has eroded to the point where there are credible polls now that says regardless of political party, respondents do not believe that higher education is a force of good for society. So whenever university presidents get together, we're not surprisingly alarmed by that. And so there's a conversation that sort of says, like, man, what is the secret lever that can get people to love us again? And I don't think that that's really the right framing. If you look at polling, it can be Gallup, can be all sorts of different polling. Americans' confidence in all institutions has declined precipitously. So, of course, at the bottom, I shouldn't say of course, but at the bottom of the heap might be Congress. But whether it's the media, whether it's public officials, almost everything, the steam has fallen. And that's what we have to grapple with. And so talking among ourselves really isn't sufficient. Now, one of the things that encourages me is that once people are on our campuses, they're enthusiastic. So there's recent survey data that shows about 9 out of 10 current students and their families are confident their education will prepare them for the careers they want. So the experience, what we're doing, I think, is fundamentally sound, but our challenge is bridging the gap with everyone who hasn't had that experience. 62% of Americans over 25 don't have college degrees. So, the upshot of all this, I think the fix isn't a PR campaign. Confidence is an outcome, and that confidence is earned through lived experience, one interaction at a time. So a favorite word I have is proximity. We close the gap through outcomes that better serve students and families. We create that by relationships with people both inside and outside the academy. And that's through more concrete connections to workforce needs, through showing up in communities and being useful. And so that's what I was talking about at that economic summit.
All right, I have an economics question for the economics professor. On the point about outcomes, there's a case to be made that a strong public research university isn't just a nice to have, it can drive economic growth. You've worked a lot on the Southern Willamette Valley Innovation Corridor and connecting what happens at Oregon and at OSU to jobs and industries in the region. I'm curious, average incomes in the state still trail the national average, even with two research universities. What's the vision for closing that gap? And how does this connect to Oregon Rising's second goal around preparing students for careers after graduation?
Let me break that into two different parts. First, we need to think about the role of Oregon in helping the broader ecosystem, whether it's the Southern Willamette Valley or the state of Oregon, to embrace and propel economic prosperity. And there's an old, the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan from New York said that if you want a great city, build a great university and wait 200 years. All right, we're going to accelerate that. But we are celebrating our sesquicentennial, 150 years. And the fact that there are two outstanding universities within 40 miles of one another, Oregon State and the University of Oregon, is an asset that not that many regions have. And so the idea behind the Southern Willamette Valley Innovation Corridor is there is all sorts of fantastic work coming out of both institutions. It is being commercialized. We're training students who fall in love with the majestic Pacific Northwest who would love to stay here. And so we have a ready, engaged, well-trained workforce. We have discoveries, innovations that can support the business climate, and we want to leverage that by working not just with the two universities, but with civic organizations, political leaders, business leaders, anyone who wants to help. Because we don't want our students who want to stay in the great state of Oregon to have to move to California or Texas to find good jobs. And by fostering this prosperity, we then can have better paying jobs. We'll have more investment in schools and parks and libraries. We'll have the resources to tackle the challenges of the unhoused. We can do all the things that make communities vibrant. Then to tie that into the second goal of Oregon Rising, that is in career preparation, part of what we're trying to do is build career communities that connect our alumni, employers, and students in meaningful ways. So that means expanding internships, embedding career readiness directly into courses, and using our incredible alumni network as mentors and connectors. Across industries and every employer that I get to speak with, I hear the same thing. Send us problem solvers who can think critically, communicate clearly, and work well on a team. I joke that our great liberal arts education that we provide is a cheat code for AI, for example. But it's not a joke, it's a reality. And so what we're doing kind of fits all together with the Innovation Corridor, with our career initiatives, to help be the best university that we can be.
Every time I hear you talk about it, it's really inspirational because it is such a great vision for what this part of the Willamette Valley could be in the next 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. Obviously, though, this work needs investment. Something you've talked openly about when you took this job was your, for quotes, Scooby-Doo moment. Oregon ranks 46th in the nation for state funding of public four-year higher education universities. How does the university maintain affordability and strong outcomes with that level of investment?
So first about the Scooby-Doo moment. I came from the state of Wisconsin, a bright purple state. At the time I had come to the University of Wisconsin, I think the state had provided roughly 40% of the university's budget. By the time I left, it was down to 12 or 13%. And we felt under siege, but though the same thing was happening in public education across the country. And so the stars aligned, and I get this opportunity at the University of Oregon. I said, aha, I'm coming to this politically blue state, although I realize there's not unanimity in the politics of the state of Oregon. But I thought, they are going to robustly fund higher education. And that's where I had what we call that Scooby-Doo moment, this whoa. It's not quite that way. And as you mentioned, Ben, in the question, we're number 46 across the state in public support for higher education. And that's why that conversation or that meditation, if you will, on proximity matters so much. That doesn't get changed unless the citizens of the great state of Oregon believe deeply in the value of public higher education. They believe that we're engines of economic prosperity. They believe that our values match the values in the broader community. And so we're trying to do that work to extend the people who know and believe in us and make the case and try to change that. On the other hand, we aren't standing still. We're working on the things that truly matter for the university and for the citizens of the state. That is creating great experiences for the students that we serve, broadening the impact and awareness of the knowledge that we provide, and digging in the communities where our interests align so that we can be part of the solutions that everyone would like to see. So it's a sort of two-front battle, if you will.
Yeah, I know we do a lot of lobbying and work with the state on that, but like you talked about outcomes and just doing the work, is there a compelling argument to be made about the UO's contribution to the state and why public institutions need more investment? The UO had a $3.7 billion economic impact last year. When you think about what Oregon's public universities are doing for the state, what comes to mind for you?
Well, that $3.7 billion is a huge number, right? So we had a commission an economic impact study last year, and let me be clear, a top line result is that the University of Oregon had a $3.7 billion impact last year and every year going forward. And behind that, that's over 21,000 jobs. We generated $238 million in state and local tax revenues. And for every dollar invested in the University of Oregon, that's generating $15 of impact. And so, some people will gravitate to metrics like this, and we are an incredible deal. And as we think about the prosperity of the state of Oregon, the public universities play an incredibly important role in driving that. It's training next generation of workers. It's developing the technologies and discoveries to fuel a 21st century economy. But the impact isn't just dollars. It includes things like the Sustainable City Year program, where our students and faculty embed in Oregon communities for a year to tackle local sustainability, design, and planning challenges. It's Crescent, the nation's first subduction zone earthquake hazard center, studying the science behind what could be the most catastrophic natural disaster in North American history. It's the Oregon Hazards Lab, which deploys early detection networks across the Pacific Northwest for earthquakes and wildfires. This is work that touches every corner of the state, not just Eugene or the southern Willamette Valley. And so a public research university should show up in communities in ways people can see and feel. And our students learn by doing, and communities get capacity that they can use. And so that's one of the things that I love about the University of Oregon.
That OHAS example is always one that I think about as an example of the innovation and the way that our researchers and students and staff can come together to solve problems that are affecting the state, a region, a country. So let's talk more about that innovation side, because this is another way Oregon really shows up. The Night Campus, Launch Oregon, a growing biotech corridor. What does the innovation pipeline look like right now? And where do you think it's headed?
Well, I think it's just going up and up. But the night campus is a national and international jewel. It was designed with a job description that's in its name, and that is the night campus for accelerating scientific impact. We pair fundamental discovery with design, prototyping, and partnerships so that ideas move into use, and it's working. But looking at the record in the last 5 years, I think 18 different startups have come out of the University of Oregon. Several of those are in the night campus, but many are coming from chemistry and the Material Science Institute. Some are coming from biology, some from physics, some from our College of Education. And so we're in, just an innovation hub for the state and region. In the last 5 years, we've had 58 patents issued, mostly in biology and chemistry, but also in computer sciences, human physiology, physics, and the night campus. We've had 111 information disclosures across those same units. And so innovation is happening every day, every week at the University of Oregon. Now, those numbers, they can get a little bit abstract. So let me tell you briefly about one of the companies that's coming out of the night campus. They've developed miniature implantable sensors that transmit real-time data about what's happening in an injury site, because the after effects of ACL surgery just isn't that good. And the problem is it's art about how taut or loose you leave the joint after surgery. And so the company, Pandaria Technology, spun out of work at the night campus. And they're developing sensors that can help surgeons dial in exactly the right tension when they reconstruct an ACL. And our first bioengineering PhD graduate, Kylie Williams, is a native Oregonian, got her degree with SEALs from both University of Oregon and Oregon State on her diploma, and she went straight to work at Pandaria. And that's the pipeline in action, discovery to company to Oregon job. And so there's just so much activity happening at the University of Oregon. And so when I talk about the great research universities like the University of Oregon, fueling prosperity, that is what I'm talking about.
You kind of touched on it, but it's not just science and startups though, right? The UO is taking on critical societal issues as well. The Balmer Institute anchors Oregon Rising's work in youth behavioral and mental health too. What does the growth there mean for the state?
I've said over and over, Ben, and I really believe this, that what's happening at the Balmer Institute is the most, if not one of the most audacious things I've seen in my decades of experience at higher education. Because there is a crisis going on right now with youth and adolescent behavioral health. And I'm an economist by training, and so I'm used to trying to break things down by supply and demand for the first instinct. And this is a problem that can be understood through supply and demand, because to work in this field right now requires having a master's or PhD in psychology or social work and the like. And there just aren't enough people to address the burgeoning problems. And so what happens is we wait until things are full-blown crises before intervening. And this is an area where an ounce of prevention can be worth, to do the cliche, a pound of cure, because there are research-backed interventions that can materially help children and their families if they're given early enough. So the Balmer Institute, this audacious vision, is to create an entirely new employment category, child behavioral health specialist, that can be acquired with bachelor level training, not a master's or PhD, but the training includes 700 hours of evidence-based clinical work that students will be trained in. And we have demonstrated this works. Our first class of child behavioral health specialists are graduating this year up in our Portland campus, and they're embedded in Portland area public schools, in community clinics, pediatricians' offices. And the state legislature voted overwhelmingly to create a new licensure tied to this work. We're receiving multi-million-dollar grants from the National Institute of Mental Health to support this work. And we're about to break ground on a new building on our Portland campus to house the program, funded in part by $53 million in state bonds. And what makes this so exciting is it's a practical innovation generated in the state of Oregon, executed in the state of Oregon, and will provide a national model that will improve the well-being of children and their families. Families will get earlier, better support. Our students will graduate into careers where the demand is enormous and growing. And it is yet another example of the University of Oregon changing the world.
I love that example too, because sometimes we can talk about the science and the complicated nature of what some of those discoveries are, but I think a lot of people can understand youth mental health and the crisis in our schools right now with that. So yeah, it's really interesting work. One thing I do appreciate about Oregon Rising too is the pillars of signature scholarship you've mentioned. There's another that is really at our core though. The UO is the birthplace of Nike. We are Tracktown USA. How does the university take something already woven into Oregon's identity and turn it into something that positions it globally, not just athletically, which a lot of people know about, but scientifically and commercially?
Ben, it's a lot like your sesquicentennial question. We can look back and celebrate the past, and then we look at where we're going, and that's even more exciting. And so, yeah, birthplace of Nike, Tracktown USA. Right in the 60s, Bill Bowerman brought the concept of running as fitness routine to the United States. He literally wrote the book on it. Yeah. It's titled Jogging. He and Phil Knight thought they could make shoes better than the ones on the market. 61 years later, Nike is the largest sports apparel company in the world. And so that culture of entrepreneurship and performance is sort of in our DNA. But what's happening now is we're taking that heritage and we're building a research and innovation ecosystem that is world-class. So the Bowerman Sports Science Center is embedded inside Hayward Field. And as an aside, Hayward Field is the greatest track and field venue on the planet.
It's gorgeous.
But the Bowerman Sports Science Center then is working on helping understand how factors influencing the performance of elite athletes, but also translating that into performance of the weekend athlete, if you will, and doing things like groundbreaking work on female athletes. For decades, research around women viewed women as just smaller versions of men and used the same training principles that would be applied on different scales. But that's simply not true. Our researchers looked at how changing cleat design could reduce ACL injuries in women who are 3 to 8 times more likely to tear their ACL depending on the sport. And then, so we have the Bowerman Human Performance Center, but then we also are one of the founding partners of the Wu-Tsai Human Performance Alliance. We are partners alongside with Stanford, Harvard, UC San Diego, and Kansas. And through the Wu-Tsai Human Performance Initiative, we have one of the largest databases of runner scans in the world. But it goes even beyond that. So we're doing, again, remarkable work in human performance, but then you layer on sports product design, where we arguably have the finest program in the world, the Warsaw Sports Business Center. We have the country's first Olympic Studies Hub, which is an International Olympic Committee endorsed Center for the Study of Olympics, and it's the only one in the United States. And so then you have a cluster that doesn't exist anywhere else. Along with that, we're the co-founders, and I think one of 8 co-founders of the Global Sport University Network that brings researchers from around the world together. So it isn't just Tracktown anymore and celebrating our past. It's about Oregon being a place, and the University of Oregon being a place where human performance is studied, commercialized, and applied at a global scale.
As we close out, I'm having a great time. We have a limited time here. I wanted to ask you something about Oregon Rising's third goal, creating a flourishing community. You've spoken many times about why this was important to codify, but one more time for the people in the back, what does it mean to you personally?
Yeah, so this word flourishing, you don't see it in higher education that often, but a colleague of mine used an analogy early on that stuck with me. A plant flourishes because the soil is right, because it has enough sunlight, enough water. So our job is to create the conditions where flourishing is a natural outcome of being here. Now, listeners might, all right, what exactly is he talking about, flourishing? And not all of us can have our own definitions. But when I think about the concept, I think about 5 things, right? We have to be healthy. We have to be well in order to flourish. We have to be able to grow, right? Because doing the same thing over and over, kind of the rat on the proverbial wheel, is stultifying. As humans, we take energy from others. Almost all of us take energy from others. So community can be very important. And then it's not always rainbows and fairies, so we have to develop resilience. And then lastly, it's useful to have your, what is your why? What is your sense of purpose? And so that is what we're talking about when we talk about flourishing. And we're working hard to try to measure it over time and figure out different things that can inculcate or help support those qualities. But I want to be clear, we're never going to stop and say, we're all now flourishing.
Right.
You just don't clap your hands one day and say, yep, we're done. So flourishing isn't about abundance. In fact, sometimes it's most important in harder times. But it's about learning, finding purpose, and trusting each other. And I think it's a really, really important issue now. So why did we codify it? I think the answer there is because the universities often assume it just happens. We talk about research excellence and graduation rates, and both of those are critical. But if the people doing the work, our students, our staff, our faculty, don't feel seen, supported, and connected to something meaningful, none of the rest is sustainable. And so to me, this is about building the kind of place where people can't help but flourish because the environment is right. That's the aspiration. Because they're in classrooms and workplaces where they can be their authentic selves and where we lead with courage and empathy.
I appreciate that. Thank you for explaining again. I find myself as a native Oregonian to really connect to that one. This campus means a lot to me, and having something speaking to the human element, I think, is really important in these goals. So I want to end though with something we worked on recently that I really liked. You said legitimacy is built at the edges, not the center. If we want confidence back, we should stop asking, how do we get people to trust us? And start asking, why would a skeptical neighbor need to see, feel, and experience to believe this place serves them too? Do you have any amendments to that now that you've sat with it for a bit?
Well, I like the question, Ben. And no amendments. So I'll double down on the sentiment. But given we have just a little bit more time, let me unpack this just a little bit. Our instinct in higher education is to defend ourselves from the centers, so to speak, to craft messaging, point to rankings, and talk about our value proposition to each other or our immediate stakeholders. And I think doing that, and doing that well, really matters. But I worry that's not what's going to change enough minds. What changes someone's mind is when their child gets a great internship through a program connected to the university, or when a community partner tells them how UO students helped redesign their downtown, or when they see a graduate stay in Oregon, become their neighbor, and build a career and a life here. And so communicating to those outside the community, not at the center, but on the edges, I think is a really critical piece of our work. We earn trust through proximity and through being useful in ways people can see and feel. And that's the everyday work that actually matters.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap this up. Karl, We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down and talk with us today. Before we go, do you have any final thoughts?
I really appreciate the opportunity. The Ducks are awesome. So folks, thank you for listening, and Sco Ducks.
Sco Ducks. Thanks again for joining us today. If you're interested in learning more, check out the links in the episode description, and don't forget to follow This is Oregon for more stories from the University of Oregon. We'll see you on the next episode. This is Oregon is produced by the Division of University Communications. For more of the latest University of Oregon research and news, visit news.uoregon.edu or find us on your favorite social media platform using the handle @uoregon. Thanks for listening, and go Ducks!